Karen, you're good? Jason, you good? Staff, are they ready? You guys good? Okay, ready? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Independence City Council meeting. Okay, oh boy, we get to hear me on rebound? Sorry about that. We're okay? Okay. It's Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. Councilor Roden and Councilor Martin Willis are excused this evening. They are not able to be with us. The rest of the council is here. Council members, you have the minutes of the June 13th meeting in front of you, and do they meet with your approval?
Move to approve.
Got a motion?
Second.
And I got a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Visitor comments. Mr. Greenwood. Just to remind everybody, there's a 5-minute limit, and council is just listening. We're not engaging in conversation. We're just listening. Mr. Greenwood.
Hi, excuse me,
You're okay?
I've got a bad throat from talking too much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Jason Greenwood. I'm the owner of Divine Distillers. I think you all know me, but in case you don't, I thought a brief introduction might help educate people a little about who we are. This is something I'm generally very guarded about, but I feel that it's important to say in this today. Our distillery is, quite frankly, one of the best distilleries in the world. Just this year, we've won 9 medals in the hardest and most prestigious competition in the world, the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. This includes a double gold and best in class, 2 gold medals, 2 silver, and 4 bronze. For perspective, over 5,000 brands from around the world have competed, including most of the world's well-known brands, Bacardi, Dewar's, Casamigos. Our distillery, our tiny distillery in Independence, has outperformed most of these brands in 8 distinct categories, and all of the brands in one of the categories. We compete and win against companies with billions of dollars, and we are a small company that is struggling to survive. Our survival depends quite literally on whether we can open our restaurant this weekend or not. Our distillery currently employs 3 full-time employees, and myself. Our restaurant currently employs 20 employees in some form of full-time or part-time capacity. I'm here to talk today to you guys once again today about whether we can open this Friday or not, our restaurant. I have been working with Fred Evander trying to get this done since April, and we still do not have a resolution. Our construction is and has been for months now virtually at a standstill, and this has been due to these issues. I have been told in no uncertain terms by Mr. Evander that Ms. West will not put our issue to City Council, as is not appropriate apparently. I also have noticed at the last City Council meeting and at this one that although it's stated that people can speak and the council will not talk to them, they will hear me. And last council meeting, mine was the only issue that council did not address or speak or interact with the speakers about. I understand that you may not respond to my statement today, but I do want it on public record. To the best of my knowledge, the only thing that is holding up our ability to open our doors to the public for our restaurant is a lack of occupancy due to the change in use of the restaurant, which has an outdoor parking and stormwater mitigation plan issues. Both of these issues I've been trying to work with the city through a process, and we continue to be in an impasse. It has been verbally communicated through my engineer that Mr. Evander is willing to accept our current drive aisle with a gravel shoulder, and therefore we do not need to add any more impervious pavement. This is an item that I have not confirmed in writing with Mr. Evander. If it is confirmed in writing, then the only issue that we have outstanding is a stormwater mitigation issue. Since we moved to Independence, we have been operating under the request of the city staff, the mayor, McCardle, council members, and many locals who have asked us to open a restaurant because they like our vision and they see the positive change we have done. Because everyone has encouraged this, we have gone forward with the plans to open a restaurant, which has been an enormous financial burden for my wife and I, who have wholly funded this endeavor. My wife and I have invested everything we have into making this an inclusive and beautiful space in Independence. We have made our building an oasis from the world, which many of you have enjoyed. We have turned our space into something beautiful in order to share this with everyone here in Independence, including almost everyone here. At this point in time, without opening the restaurant this Friday, we are not sure that any part of our business will be able to survive, as too much money and time has already been spent trying to get to where we are. It costs us tens of thousands of dollars every month to not be open and keep hoping that the issue gets resolved. In order to articulate this more clearly to those of you here, I will point out that the last city council meeting, there was a heated debate about how to fund the library on Saturdays. Divine Distillers would have gladly funded that item in Independence and been more than willing to do that in order to open a month ago. In that time span, we have spent that money on engineers, salaries, and people not doing anything productive. If we are not able to open this week,
the kind of key questions for that phase of planning is what are our key housing needs? And do we have capacity in the land available to meet that need over the next 20 years? And then second is the housing production strategy. So that's a little more of a detailed action plan which addresses what can the city do to help facilitate housing production. And so there's a whole nother planning process, and I think there's an agenda item for you later to apply for a grant for your next, to the state to conduct a housing production strategy. So that'll be coming later. And really the housing needs analysis today is just kind of setting the stage for understanding what are the needs and what's the capacity to meet those needs based on your zoning and buildable land supply. Okay, so first I want to start with just some updates on some community engagement. So we like to, I think I skipped, sorry about that. So in the overall timeline, we're here nearing the end. As I mentioned, we had a planning commission meeting on June 12th to present the final housing needs analysis report to them. And then as Fred mentioned, you'll be moving into having adoption hearings in the next month or so. So the H&A is primarily a technical study, but there's also, we like to supplement the analysis with doing some outreach to the community. We presented some findings of an online survey to you at our last meeting. We've done some additional outreach in the community, wanted to just present some updates from that. And so that outreach included some videos that are posted on the city's website to help the community kind of be informed about the planning process and what we were finding. Some open house events where we went actually to kind of meet people where they are and talk about some housing issues. And staff did some outreach in the downtown area, just kind of informally talking to some people. And the purpose of that was mostly informational to get the word out about this project and the planning process that happens, but also just some of the insights from those conversations influenced how we the types of recommendations and policies that we included in the housing needs analysis report. So a few of the themes that emerged from that are documented in the report. We wanted to kind of distill it down to some of the key things that we were hearing. And so these are the kind of 8 key themes that are identified in the report. Many of these we've kind of discussed in previous meetings, but a few not covered before that I wanted to highlight briefly. One, kind of just concerns about managing the impacts of growth and the impacts of new housing, whether that be traffic impacts, livability impacts, design and compatibility of new housing. Those are things that were brought up. A desire for more family-friendly housing options. So that could either mean kind of larger units or units that have better access to outdoor spaces. Those are the kinds of things we heard brought up a few times. And then age-friendly or accessible housing. So this idea that there should be options for seniors to age in place or to downsize, and there aren't as many options for people as they reach that phase of their life. So those are the kind of some of the things we heard in the feedback and that have been reflected in the strategies and policies in the report. Okay, next I'm going to cover some updates to some of the more technical analysis that we did as part of the housing needs analysis. And so, as I mentioned, evaluating the capacity and supply of land is really a central goal for a housing needs study. And so we're trying to answer the question, is there enough land with the right type of zoning to meet our future housing needs? And so this is what the data looked like when we presented to you a few months ago. And this shows the amount of housing units we estimate can be built on buildable lands by zoning district within the community. And you can see that the major finding from that is just that the main zoning district where there is the most buildable land is the mixed residential zone, which is shown there in green. So one of the challenges with that is converting the amount of acreage in that zone to how much housing can be built and how much housing of what kind do we expect in the future is a challenging thing, especially for a zone that allows for a wide range of housing types. And so we elected to take a closer look at that zone and specifically in some of the assumptions we made in projecting housing capacity within your urban growth boundary. And so this was the data we presented to you before of our estimates of housing capacity by housing type. And you can see there's a significant surplus of single-family detached housing, so more capacity for that housing type than there is a projected need. And then we projected a deficit of a need for townhouse or plex, which is kind of 2 to 4 attached units in a building, and then multifamily housing, 5 or more attached units. So there's a deficit for those two types. And really the two reasons for this is there being very little buildable land in the residential medium and higher density zones. And we had only assumed in the MX zone that a small percentage of that zone would be built with those housing types. So in looking a little closer at the data, we elected to make a couple of revisions to our methodology. One, to assume that in the commercial and mixed use zones, that those would actually develop with more multifamily and townhouse units and at a higher density than we had originally projected. And we looked at some of the approved master plans, so particularly Brandy Meadows and Southwest Crossing in the Southwest Independence area. And based on that, felt comfortable with increasing our projected density for the MX zone into the future. We're assuming it's a little bit higher density than we had before, and assuming a higher share of multifamily or townhouse units. So in taking a closer look at the data, what flows from that is then these are the updated capacity estimates. And so remains that there would be a surplus for single family detached housing, but we do, and a small deficit or a small surplus for townhouse and plex housing and multifamily housing. So this does not imply that there's no need to expand the capacity for these housing types or remove barriers to building these housing types. So as I mentioned, there's many assumptions we make in trying to project how much housing capacity there is in the city. And if those assumptions are off, they're more likely to be off for the townhouse and plex and multifamily units. And so that's why, as you see in the housing needs analysis, many of the recommended land use strategies focus on removing barriers to and expanding capacity for those housing types. Okay, so turning now to kind of what are the actions that need to be taken as a result of the HNA. And so we've identified some measures that need to be implemented at the same time as the adoption of the housing needs analysis. So after I cover these, I'll cover a separate set of recommendations that can be implemented over time, over 1 to 8 years, basically, and will be part of your, incorporated into your process of planning for a housing production strategy. But these code amendments I'll discuss today are really closely linked to showing that you have enough capacity within your UGB to meet your projected housing need. And for that reason, they need to be, under state law, they need to be adopted at the same time as your housing needs analysis. So the key idea here is really that the city needs to maintain enough buildable land within its UGB to meet its 20-year housing needs. And in order for that housing capacity to be counted towards meeting your needs, the housing must be allowed under clear and objective standards, as there's the statutory language there. And so as we audited the zoning code and looked more at the development code and looked more closely into were there any standards that were not clear and objective that were applying to some of those needed housing types. And we found 2 areas where we recommend making amendments to allow for, to provide for clear and objective standards. I think the clicker is not working. Okay, there we go. So the 2 amendments to the development code that you'll see in your package that when the housing needs analysis comes forward for adoption are first to allow for multifamily housing as a permitted use in the MX zone. So today, currently, a conditional use permit is required. And because we're counting on the multifamily housing in that zone to meet the projected need into the future, that housing needs to be permitted under clear and objective standards. The conditional use approval criteria aren't clear and objective. And so under kind of state law, it doesn't meet that standard. And so the recommended change is to allow for multifamily housing as a permitted use. What that'll mean is that new multifamily housing projects in that zone will not go through a planning commission hearing and review. There'll continue to be a public notice for any multifamily development in that zone. And there'll be a site design review process by staff, as there is for all multifamily housing today. And that brings us to the second change, which is to the site design review standards. And those are required for all multifamily housing in townhomes in all zones. And some of the approval criteria are not clear and objective. So they're discretionary type of guidelines or criteria. And so the recommended change there is to create a separate set of approval criteria that just applies to the residential developments that are applicable for site design review. And those criteria would only be clear and objective. And then the other standards, which are more discretionary, could continue to be applied to commercial and industrial development. So those are the amendments that we're recommending that you adopt as part of your adoption of the HNA in the coming months. Okay, and then moving on to, as I mentioned, there's many other recommended strategies in the HNA, and so we'll cover a few of those today. So unlike those two code amendments I mentioned, these are not kind of required by state law. These are changes that we find would respond to the housing needs, some of the issues, some of the things we heard from the development community and its residents. And so we focus mostly here on land use strategies. When you go into your housing production strategy, you'll also look at other types of ways to facilitate housing development. So it could be financial incentives or public infrastructure projects, a broader range. And here, really the HNA is focused on your land use policies. So when we came to you at the last meeting, we had just 4 strategies we'd initially identified in the draft. That has since been expanded to a total of 10 different strategies. And so I'm just going to talk about and highlight some of the strategies and ideas that are new here since we last talked, but open to your questions about any of these. So the first one that's new, and they're marked here in red on the list, is to encourage a wider variety of housing types in the medium density residential zone. So this zone allows today for duplexes and townhomes, but I think 80 to 90% of the housing that's been built has been single family detached housing. So the idea here is to take a closer look at the standards, do some more additional outreach to try to identify what kinds of code changes could make it more attractive to build a wider variety of housing types in that zone. Another new strategy is number 5, which is to provide opportunities for small scale multifamily housing in more zone districts. And so those are, the multifamily housing is allowed today in the RM and RH zone, which are the medium and higher density zones, as well as the MX zone. There are other zone districts where multifamily housing is not allowed. And in those zone districts, it remains there could be opportunities to allow for things like a triplex or a quadplex, something that's relatively lower density and can be scaled about the size of a house, remain compatible with a single family neighborhood, but could provide wider variety of options for different kinds of housing to be developed in those zones. And so that's really just the idea behind number 5 there. So moving on to number 7 is new in this list here. So improving standards and streamlining review process for smaller infill projects. I think that Fred is actually going to talk a little bit more about this idea because it is part of a grant application that he's proposing, I think, to continue this work moving forward. But generally the idea is that some of the city's standards, zoning and development standards, when applied to smaller infill projects, just don't really make sense. They're more designed around larger, what we call greenfield projects. And so taking another look at some of those issues, while also trying to make it a little less onerous for those housing projects to be developed, to go through a streamlined process. Number 8 is evaluating strategies to encourage development of family-friendly housing is a new idea. And so, again, responding to that message we heard from the community, and knowing that there are a lot of families with children in independence and families that want to move here. So 2 kind of ideas that are embedded in that strategy is to review the city's open space standards related to housing. So are they resulting in the type of kind of quality outdoor open spaces with housing that are family friendly? And then secondly, to try to analyze whether any of the current zoning and development standards are encouraging developers to provide smaller units over larger units. This is something especially we see in multifamily development, where most of the units end up being 1-bedrooms or studios. And cities can make some changes, provide some incentives to try to make it more financially attractive to build, say, 3-bedroom apartments. Okay, a couple more here. So number 9 is to consider density bonus incentives for affordable and accessible units. And so the development code right now has no zoning incentives for a private market developer to build income restricted affordable housing. Many cities across the state are doing this now, or do this with some success. And that might look like providing additional density, additional building height in exchange for a developer including 10 or 20%, 30% of the units to be income restricted, affordable to lower moderate incomes. And lastly, number 10 here is to consider strategies to discourage redevelopment of existing manufactured home parks. This is an issue that many other communities across the state are dealing with as well, is that existing manufactured home parks or mobile home parks may be under pressure to redevelop over time as those become less profitable uses. And this is a kind of uniquely challenging issue for the tenants in manufactured home parks. They often can't move their unit, either impractical or it's actually illegal to move, depending on the state of the unit. And so some cities are looking at zoning tools to try to discourage redevelopment of manufactured home parks and preserve them over time. Certainly not without its complications, but that's a tool that's at the city disposal that we wanted to include in here for your consideration. Okay, last item is comprehensive plan amendments. So the housing needs analysis will become part of your comprehensive plan. Since we've presented to you last, we've prepared some specific amendments to the comprehensive plan. I'm going to focus on amendments to the housing policies chapter. So a few changes that were made to that chapter is just revising the overall goal to reference issues of providing for affordable housing options, which is that idea of affordability as a key goal wasn't reflected in the comprehensive plan. Some changes to the housing mix policies to make them a little less prescriptive. Added 2 new policies to specifically state the policy goal of providing options for more affordable housing types. And also 2 new policies to address some of those unique housing issues or needs that we talked about either age-friendly and accessible housing or family-friendly housing. So these are issues that we felt weren't really well addressed by the current comprehensive plan policies. And then here is the actual language that's for the new policies that were proposed to be added to the comprehensive plan. We'll go through those verbatim tonight, but we can come back to those if you have any questions. And then lastly, just to reiterate, in terms of the next steps in the adoption process, we're going to be finalizing our report, technical documents. City staff will be taking over from there to finalize the draft code amendments and bring those code amendments and comprehensive plan amendments in a package to you with the HNA for adoption coming later this summer. Okay. open it up now for your questions.
I think there are going to be some questions.
Yep.
Councilor Thor will
And this,
start off.
this is probably a question for staff. The grant that we got for land conservation for this, is it gonna also fund the housing and production strategy, or do we have to source that?
So that's, I don't know if it's gonna come from exactly the same pot. They've got a variety of different pots of money, and they say apply and we'll put you in the program that fits this.
Perfect, thank you.
I forgot I have to push my button. I have a number of different questions, please. Can we go back to the multifamily housing, the development code page, please?
Is it just here?
I'm trying to, and I think one more forward, please. Well, okay, let me just try and then you can direct me. When you talk about multifamily housing, that's duplex, triplex, does that also include like apartment complexes when you're talking about multifamily housing?
Sure, yeah, when I reference it here, we're really referring to projects with 5 or more units attached.
5 or more.
So duplex, triplex would be kind of a separate category.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Under the revised schedules, revised strategies, what kind of changes are possible to encourage different kinds of housing? Well, can you give examples of what those examples might be to encourage different kinds of housing? And I'm going to be asking some other example type questions.
Yeah. So like, for example, in the medium density zone, a couple of things that you might consider there. The zone doesn't have a minimum density standard, and so it has a maximum density standard, but you might consider a minimum density standard, and that would effectively then make it more likely that a developer would choose to build townhouses or multifamily housing over single family detached. That's one option. Another would be to, so many of the zone districts, for example, may allow only a duplex, but not a triplex or quadplex. So that would be just allowing more attached units is another option. Reducing the minimum lot size is required. And so today, for example, I think in the RM zone, you might be required to have 2,500 square feet for every additional unit that you add to a project. By reducing that to maybe something like 1,500 square feet or 1,000 square feet, it just makes it more economical to build some of that higher density housing. So those are some of the kind of the tweaks in the code that will make it more attractive to build a wider variety of housing types.
I'm going to go on to, can you give me some examples of it, additional examples, because it mentions incentives. And could you talk a little bit about examples of, you've given some right there, but I think that there's others that's your suggestion.
Yeah, and when I say incentives here, like on number 9 here, I'm referring specifically to something like a density bonus for affordable housing. And so the incentive there might be, let's say in the code today, that you're allowed to have up to 20 units per acre is the maximum density in the residential high density zone. So the density bonus might say, but if you include 20% of the units to be affordable to families earning less than 80% of the median income, then you're allowed to have a density of up to 25 units an acre or 30 units an acre. And so that's the incentive there, where it might make, there's a point at which it might make more economic sense for a developer to include those income restricted units, despite those bringing in lower revenues than the market rate units, because they get more units overall.
When you're,
I do have a question when you're through.
thank you. So when you're talking about incentives, I know some cities are talking about waivers of fees and all those kind of things. Are those the kind of things that you're suggesting, or that are just part of the toolbox?
Yeah, those would be something I think for you to consider as part of your housing production strategy in the next phase of work. And so the housing needs analysis is really more focused on your land use policies in your development code. And so that's one part of the picture. But if you combine those with financial incentives, that can be even more effective. But really talking more about the regulations.
While you are just talking about regulations at this point, I just do want to go on record as saying I have concerns about, trying to waive SDCs and things like that, because otherwise, how do we pay for water, sewer, roads, and we're not a big dog. And since we're not a big dog compared to some others, could you talk to us about other rural communities or communities of our size that are doing what we're seeing here, that you can give us as examples so we can see how this plays out on the ground?
Sure, yeah, we're working with a few right now. So one good example might be with Lebanon, who's a little kind of ahead of you in the process here. They're working on their housing production strategy right now. We're finalizing it. And they have similar concerns about the fiscal impact of providing any kind of incentives for housing development. And so we've worked through them and found some incentives that may have less of an impact than others. For example, they're going to be offering likely system development charge deferrals rather than waivers. So what that might mean is, rather than paying the system development charge up front before you're issued your building permit, you'd be paying it at the time you get your certificate of occupancy. And that actually shifts when that cost is imposed on the developer, which can make a difference in how they finance it and can actually be an effective incentive. It doesn't change the revenue that comes into the city, just the timing of when that revenue comes in. So those are the kinds of things that they're looking at. They're also looking at a property tax incentive program that would be pretty narrowly targeted just to projects that would otherwise not be feasible, but for having the property tax abatement. So again, trying to limit the fiscal impact by only accepting it for projects that would not otherwise happen.
Lots more conversation. Councilor Morgan, I go to you now.
Yes, since we were discussing it earlier, what are the parking ramifications of this kind of development?
So I assume when you're thinking of this kind of development, you think like higher density apartments.
And will there be
homes, yeah.
required parking for each living space? Will there be 2 required parking places? Will there be none?
So we didn't make any specific recommendations around minimum parking requirements. We looked at your minimum parking requirements, and whether or not they're sufficient for any particular project is really a project-specific determination. In general, they're not significantly higher or lower than many other communities of your size. And you do certainly require parking today. And so we don't think it's a significant barrier to higher density development. So that can be a barrier, is just the amount of space that's occupied on a site to provide parking. But given you're a smaller town, as much transit, you can't rely on people not owning at least one car, that we don't see it as a major issue in terms of as a barrier to housing development.
I think it would be a major issue based on where it would be located.
Thank you. Additional questions? I have one, but I don't want to monopolize. Okay. Could you talk for a moment about the statewide, I know that there's some requirements that we're having to do some of these things. Could you speak to us about that, and so our community understands what the direction, constraints, requirements? I'm not sure what the word I want to use, but could you provide a context here, please?
Mm-hmm. So I can speak to what's been passed in law the last session, the most recent legislative session just ended, and it's kind of unclear exactly how everything will play out for the future of this, or any things that change.
Understood.
But under the last session, the new requirements that apply to a city of your size, many I think you've already complied with in terms of specific changes to your development code. So you must allow duplexes in every lot where single family housing is allowed. You've already complied with that. The other big change was House Bill 2003, and that is what led to this project. And so you must adopt this housing needs analysis by the end of this year. And so that put a timeline and a requirement to adopt these plans. The rules that guide how you do this plan didn't change. And so this kind of planning exercise was something that many cities were doing anyway. But the state now set a schedule and said that you must continue to do it on a regular basis, demonstrate to the state that you have capacity within your urban growth boundary to meet your housing needs. And we've found that you do. And so that's really the change for housing needs analysis. The other change was the requirement for housing production strategy. And that's the more significant change that would apply to you is now you need to go through a process where you adopt this plan that spells out, there's a set of rules about how you need to spell out what kinds of actions you're going to take as a city to meet your housing needs. And it goes beyond what's typically required for this process of a housing needs analysis. And that housing production strategy is then reviewed by the state, and they say, yes, looks good. And then you're supposed to report back to the state every 4 years to say what you've achieved, what you haven't. So at this point, there's not a lot of other direct state intervention in your development regulations. It's just kind of a requirement to produce these plans and show that you're taking steps.
Thank you for that context. I think that's helpful, that it defines our work going forward. Additional questions? I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the months to come. Thank you very much for taking the time to come in. We do appreciate it.
Sure thing. I'm going to stick around for the grant application.
Thank you. Yes, just make sure that you give it to us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to go on to some reports. I have a couple of things to talk about. First of all, as you all know, the Oregon Legislature just adjourned on Sunday, and because of the good work of Representative Evans and Senator Patterson, the City of Independence is, the legislature has passed some money for the bridge at Chestnut. Not all that we need, but a significant amount of it. And we also have received grant funding for road upgrades at the corner of Polk and Main Street, which will help with our industrial area. So I want to thank both our representative and our senator for advocating on our behalf. Other things that yours truly has been up to, you saw the Juneteenth proclamation I issued, in that following up on the federal designation of that holiday, and that was already put out on the web. COG Board of Directors, we have had some conversation. We've had conversation in this group a little bit on ballot measure 5 and 50. The Mid-Willamette Valley Council of the Governments is going to take a look at the implications of 5 and 50 and what it does to cities and counties, what the implications are. Does reset at sale make a difference? And as we've seen, we are not alone in the challenges we're facing. There are a number of cities around the state that are significantly taking a look at that. The LOC board met just last Friday, and as you know, I serve on that as a past president, and we were reviewing the legislative activities. It wasn't done yet, and so there are a number of good things that happened. There are other things that didn't move forward, but we will continue. I've had meetings with Senator Patterson. Having relationships with our local legislators really helps, so that at the final hours of the legislature, we can send a message and I can get a phone call, and we can talk about what legislation is in front of us. Coming up next week, I'll be meeting with Representative Salem Health, talking about the needs for additional medical services in our community. And we are working in concert with our sister cities in the region. And so we continue to work on that. Had the opportunity this last weekend to, along with our world famous city recorder, to be selling Fourth of World Famous. Is that correct? It is. Anyway, just selling wristbands for the 4th of July, and that was lots of fun spending some. And then just a reminder, everybody, that on the 4th of July, yours truly plus the mayor of Monmouth and again our world famous city recorder will be helping me as we follow the horses in the 4th of July parade with shovels. And so that is coming up, so I'm sure many of you will be involved with 4th of July. With that as my report, I'm going to go to council liaison reports. Councilor Morton, I think you have library board and the museum advisory board. To you.
I do indeed, thank you. At the Independence Library, the summer reading program is in full swing and being embraced enthusiastically by the community. One topic of serious discussion at the library board meetings has been budget constraints affecting the library for the coming fiscal year. The library director reported that the individual who had filled the most significant position to have been cut did secure another spot and will suffer no loss of work or loss of pay. One question that came up in board discussions was whether or not the library could fill a part-time positional cut with volunteers. Volunteers are able to help the library in many ways, but due to confidentiality and privacy restrictions, they are not able to work behind the desk to look up patron records or to check out materials. The Friends of the Independence Public Library, a 501c3 organization, is dedicated to supporting the library and will continue to fundraise both through book sales at the old library and through other opportunities as they arise. This group helps pay for library programs and many extras not covered by the annual library budget. The library building itself, after having gone through a number of needed improvements, is sound and fully functional. 2023 marks, believe it or not, the 20th anniversary of our new library. The building was officially opened during the Independence Hop and Heritage Festival 2003, and the 20-year anniversary of the library will be celebrated during the 2023 festival. The Learning Hub in the children's area has been furnished and is impressive in both looks and functionality. Despite budget setbacks, the library will continue to be an important hub and a significant gathering place in Independence. And for the Heritage Museum. In early May, the Heritage Museum celebrated its first full year of operation in its new location in downtown Independence on 2nd and C Streets. During its first year, the museum hosted nearly 5,000 visitors, and the numbers for year 2 promised to be even more impressive. Many school groups visited the museum this spring, and a host of volunteers led tours of teachers and students. 2 very large groups of students came to visit the museum, saw the osprey exhibit, and heard from a raptor specialist who brought a live bird of prey. Students were split into sectors and took side visits to the library where a book about ospreys was read by Miss Jo to the very attentive children. The museum has had memorable and very well displayed exhibits that are regularly rotated and keep our museum a very interesting place to visit. New graphics and information about local flora and fauna have been installed on the outside walls of the building and attract lots of lookers. New exhibits and thoughtful enhancements ensure that our museum is and will continue to be a very dynamic place. One highly anticipated exhibit coming in August will be about the Ella Curran Food Bank, how it started and how it continues to serve the community in such important ways. The exhibit will be interactive, providing a hands-on opportunity for children to shop for families' food needs. A local auto recovery company donated a half car for use in the exhibit, illustrating how Ella Curran first began operating the food bank from the back of her car. The Heritage Museum will play an active part in the Independence Hop and Heritage Festival, will present the annual Ghost Walk, and is planning a ticketed event for late October called Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror, made possible with assistance from Valkyrie Wine Tavern and Musical Independence. Our Heritage Museum is a community asset. It is being noticed and appreciated by area, statewide, and even national museum associations.
Push my button. I apologize. Thank you again, Counselor. Appreciate that. Counselor Kaur, Regional Homelessness, please.
Yes, I first want to ask if we can recharacterize my report, because I don't cover all the regional homeless events. I cover the Homeless Alliance. So
Thank you.
maybe, Karen, if we call that a continuum of care update, possibly, something like that. The Homeless Alliance has been supported by consultants since its inception, I think 4 years ago. That's not a good economic model going forward. So we have finally, after much deliberation, hired an executive director. Her name is Elaine Lozier, and she is the former Pacific Source representative to the Homeless Alliance. So she's got some working experience, plus she's got some provider experience, and I think she's going to be a really good asset moving forward. That's all I got.
Great. Thank you very much. West, I think it's to you for the city manager report.
And I have a green light, which means that I do have a live mic. I'm going to follow up just a little bit on what the mayor said about Measure 5 and 50. I too serve on the LOC Board of Directors, and at our meeting on Friday, they also announced that they're going to be staffing a Measure 5, Measure 50 subcommittee. This is really affecting cities throughout the state. And you can see that if the LOC and the Council of Governments are both moving forward on this particular matter. Then I'm going to go to some fun things. I don't know if y'all noticed, but the windows out there are wearing shirts, and they are Independence Day shirts. They are available for purchase. They're lovely. You can purchase them right here on the second floor during business hours. You can also get wristbands from the second floor. And speaking of Independence Day festivities, they begin on Sunday, run through Tuesday night. No wristbands are required for the Sunday events, but they're required for Monday and Tuesday. And you can get more information and schedule events at our website. We, as a city, are fully vested in that Independence Day's event. And on Monday, July 3rd, the Civic Center will be closed to the public because almost every employee is going to be out there serving our community as a part of the event staff. So just to let everyone know, July 3rd, the City Hall will not be open to the public. We'll be right back open on the 5th, and my folks will be working. It'll just be in a different location doing a slightly different thing. The museum, follow up on that, is participating in Exploring History and Feeding the Mind event on July 8th. It's a multi-stop history tour that begins at our own museum, and you can find out more or purchase tickets at www.orheritage.org. I really wanted to go to this event. It looks amazing, and I have a conflict, so if any of you can go, I would highly recommend it. It's kind of a traveling history tour. Also going on here at City Hall, Congresswoman Salinas' staff will be hosting a free mobile casework hours here on the 3rd floor in Ash Creek on Thursday, June 29th from noon to 3. That's where they can help our community members, anyone that needs help with things at that federal level. So do you need assistance with a federal agency? Do you need renewal of a passport? They will have a caseworker who speaks Spanish available. And again, they'll be here Thursday from noon to 3, upstairs Ash Creek Conference Room. You can find out more information on both Congresswoman Salinas' Facebook page and the city's Facebook page. Okay, the secondary seasonal Life Fest station will be put in place this week. It might be out there today, but it'll definitely be this week. With the weather getting warmer, we expect to see an increase in visitors to the river, and the river's dropped far enough that we can actually get the station in place. So it took a little bit of work, but we're gonna get that done this week. And then finally, and I'm gonna let Karen know because she's gonna have to cue this up, the biosolids removal is moving along rapidly. We are about 99% complete with removal from Lagoon 2, and the contractors will begin on Lagoon 3 just after the 4th of July. And we have a brand new, just created video that no one else has seen except Emmanuel, Gerald, and I.
Hi, my name is Gerald Fisher.
And it's gonna come up, right?
Lagoon biosolids, wow.
Mhm. It is, and I have already gotten Gerald's signature for, I'm gonna sell it when he becomes a high-level actor, because this was an amazing video.
Kenna, while we're waiting, I just want to say, with Representative Salinas coming to town and talking about the federal level assistance, people who need Social Security disability,
Yes.
Veterans Administration disability, those are the kinds of things that she's going to address. And I was able to get Social Security disability through Senator Merkley from my sister, so it does help to talk to our congressional reps.
Very much so.
Hi, my name's Gerald Fisher. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Independence. Today we're at the wastewater treatment facility for the city. All the city sewage runs to this treatment plant. It's a lagoon system style plant. It's made up of 4 lagoons. All of the sewage runs in at this location, which is the headworks. And then the sewage, the raw sewage, flows into Lagoon 1, where it starts its treatment process. It ends up going through Lagoon 2 and 3, and eventually to Lagoon 4. At the end of the treatment process, we chlorinate the water and then dechlorinate it, and in the summertime, it's discharged to some fields north of the city, and the rest of the year it's discharged to the Willamette River. The way the treatment plant works is when the raw sewage comes in, the solids settle out, and the water is treated by a certain style of bacteria and the solids are treated by another. What ends up happening over time is that solid builds up. Even though it's getting broken down by the bacteria, over time it builds up. It takes many years to happen. And every so often what we have to do is remove the biosolids and have them hauled off to a landfill. So as you can see out here, there's a dredge that is actually pulling out the biosolids. That dredge pumps it over to a facility that's over by the east side of Lagoon 1, and that's where they go through the dewatering process. We'll head over there in just a few minutes, kind of give you a better idea what's happening and explain that process. So the company we hired to do the biosolids removal is American Process Group, and what they've done is set up several centrifuges to dewater the biosolids. The water's pumped in here and it goes through the centrifuges, and then below you can see the biosolids that have been pressed and the water's taken out of it is going along a conveyor and is conveyed up and over into the truck to be hauled away. This is a pretty much continuous operation Monday through Friday, and American Process Group is committed to removing the biosolids in Lagoons 2 and Lagoon 3 in a matter of about 2 months. Because we're dealing with biosolids, one of the things we want to do is make sure that nothing actually leaves or runs off from the site. So American Process Group has put down these tarps and check dam spots in order to control and contain anything. And when they move the equipment out, they'll wrap everything up and the site will be left clean when they leave. Once the biosolids are done, as part of the next phases of the project, phase 2 will be an upgrade to the headworks to actually screen off the biosolids so they no longer go into the lagoon, and we'll automatically haul those off on a regular basis. The last phase is to put in aeration, and what aeration does in the lagoons is it allows additional oxygen to be placed into the lagoons and allows the bacteria to work a lot more efficiently. When we get the project completely finished, the plant will be set up to handle all of the flows for the next 20 years of both population growth and commercial and industry growth.
So there you go. Yeah, isn't that great? I know, I'm very proud of my staff. And I think, Mayor, if you will allow me a little bit more leeway, I will just say that my part is done, and next you get to hear from, you just heard about our biosolids, and now you get to hear about cybersecurity from our IT director.
Good evening, and welcome.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Jason Kistler, IT Director for the City of Independence. This will be my second council update, so we'll just kind of go what's gone over the last year, 18 months. So we'll go over some projects that have been completed, and then I figured I'd spend just a little bit of time, since it's been in the news a lot lately, to talk about ransomware. We finally have some help. This is Ashley. She came to us. So she is actually wearing quite a few hats. She's part-time doing IT work, help desk, website design, and she's also been helping out Emmanuel with a lot of communications projects. And then she's also doing building permitting, which we've really needed some help in as well. So she's been a great addition to the team. All right, last year's projects. One of the big ones was we updated all of the mobile data terminals in the patrol cars. And in addition to that, we also rolled out a new computer-aided dispatch system. I'm trying to make sure that I define all of my acronyms. So if you hear me say some letters that you don't know, call me on it. This was a pretty big project. This is what the officers use all day long in their cars. It controls which calls they go to, all their notes on what they handled. I mean, it's very critical to their job. So that was a big project. Next, we have access control here at the Civic Center. So that would be all the physical locks on the building, being able to use your Prox card to get into certain areas. The system that we had before the upgrade was original to the building, so it was about 10 years old, and we definitely don't want all of our locks just to stop working someday unexpectedly. It also was required by CJIS requirements that we upgrade to do additional reporting that we need for that audit. And fortunately, it came in $12,000 under budget, so that was great news. We also deployed new smart automated external defibrillators to all the patrol cars. Half of that money came from the Spirit Mountain Community Fund from a grant, so thank you to them. Essentially, these, they can track all sorts of telemetry as far as when they're used, when they need to be replaced, including how the officers actually perform when they're using them. So there's a whole bunch of information that we can get off of them. The new museum facility, I actually designed and installed a building security system there. We have quite a few artifacts, so we felt it was pretty important to make sure those were safe. And then we also did a bunch more security cameras. We added some to Inspiration Gardens. I know we've had a lot of complaints with some vandalism down there, so we expanded down there. Added some of the downtown core, and then I'm sure you saw in the newsletter about the safe exchange zone at the Civic Center, which is basically 2 parking spots where people can meet. If there's an online purchase, they can exchange their goods there, or if 2 parents are exchanging a child or something, it's something that's monitored by the police in case something happens. All right. So ransomware, I'm sure everyone's heard about it. I'm going to try and stay a little 50,000 foot, but if you want to get into any details, just feel free to stop me and ask any questions. So what is it? Basically, in its most simple form, ransomware is when somebody breaks into your system, essentially holds all of your data for hostage and demands that you make a payment. They often put a very short timeline on that payment. Basically, the threat is if you do not pay in time, either the ransom will go up or they will completely destroy all your data and you'll be stuck up a creek, as it were. Some actors threat actors actually engage in what's called double extortion. So they will break into your system, lock up all your data, demand a ransom from it. You may pay the ransom or get your data back, but then they'll pay you a visit months later and say, by the way, we also made a copy of all your data, and we have a bunch of your sensitive information, and if you don't want it released, then you'll pay us even more money. This is a very big industry. It's run like a professional business in the criminal underworld, and we're talking tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. So what motivates them to do this? Obviously, money. So there's the ransom, what they can sell it for, the sensitive data. So a lot of people think like, oh, I don't do anything very interesting at the city. What does it matter whether I'm sensitive about security? And it's not so much that they are after you as a particular person, but what you may have access to that you don't realize. So someone doing utility billing here, if they broke in through them, perhaps they could get all of our utility billing customers' information. That information can be sold online, complete identities, sell in the dark net for a couple bucks. If you get accounts with banking login, those can go for $100 a piece. So there's still stuff there. In addition to things that can be sold, they'll often look for intellectual property. So that would be more of a corporate espionage type setting where they want to steal your secret sauce and basically do your business harm. Another one is hacktivism. So that's basically people that don't agree with you politically or socially, and they're motivated to try and hurt you. And then the last one is state-sponsored attacks. So that would be other foreign governments trying to damage the US. We've actually seen quite an increase in this since the Ukraine war started, and especially with the sanctions against Russia, that's really kind of ticked things up. So the impact. Sophos, which is a well-known security group, did a study on the impact of ransomware. So in their study, they found that 66% of all organizations in the globe have been hit by ransomware in some way or another. 90% of those ransomware attacks impacted their ability to operate. 86% of those ransomware attack victims lost business or revenue. The average cost to clean up a ransomware attack is $1.4 million. And then the average time to fully recover from a ransomware attack would be 1 month. So you can see that could be very impactful. I mean, imagine running a business and you cannot make any profit for a month. So mitigation, how do we defend against this? We do actually use more than an umbrella. So one of the things we do security in depth, which is basically a layered approach. One of the things that we use is called network detection and response. And I guess I should back up a little bit as far as how they get in. A lot of it is using ways to get in that we don't know is a vulnerability yet. They use the term 0 day. And essentially, we're able to defend what we know about, but it's very difficult to defend what we don't know about out there. So this is where the NDR comes in. Essentially, that is software and hardware that monitors everything that goes on our network. And if it sees something that's out of the ordinary that administrators like myself or Ashley do, it basically takes automatic action to block it. That's pretty key because these things move really fast. I mean, fast enough to where if I was asleep, got an alert, by the time I wake up and access a computer, the damage is already done. So we do need those automated tools to be fast. We also use endpoint detection and response, which is basically software that lives on the end user's computer or on their laptop. And that, again, kind of does the same thing as the NDR, where it kind of analyzes what's going on the computer, and anything that looks like it may be trying to do something negative, it'll automatically stop it and report it. At least that's the idea. Another thing we do that bites a lot of companies is patching. Anytime there's a software update, we are trying to be on top of it to get it installed. That's the most common way for people to bypass your defenses is, okay, you didn't update this server, it's vulnerable, and so it's very easy to get in. And one of the main, biggest parts of this defense is our users. We've employed multi-factor authentication, which really helps stop people. I mean, you hear about people's logins getting stolen or their passwords. You get told not to use the same password on every site. This is part of why multi-factor adds on to that. So not only do you have to know a password, but you also have to prove something else, something you have, such as your cell phone that has a text message on it, or something that you are, like a scan of your face or something like that. So that'll really help if somebody breaks in. Additionally to that is just really pushing security awareness testing of what the dangers are, what you can do to stop it. Our staff has been pretty good. If they get an email, they're usually, hey, Jason, is this okay to open? You know, so they've been doing a great job at that. Then lastly is offsite backups. So if we do get hit, everything gets taken control of. We do store in 2 different geographical locations in the US so that we can recreate from the ground up if we need to. And in the news, so these attacks have happened just in the last few months, just to kind of give you an idea of how widespread it is. So we'll start local. We've got Oregon City. They got hit pretty good. Fortunately, they did have backups and were able to get up and running. Curry County got hit pretty hard. Umpqua Bank, we know them. Oregon DMV, I'm sure everyone heard about that in the news. And now we're starting to get into some companies that have quite a bit of resources. So this is not a unique problem. City of Oakland, California, Florida Supreme Court, US Marshal Service. You'd figure they would know how to secure their systems really well. Dish Network, if you're a Dish Network customer, and Dole Food Company. So there's some pretty big names there. So if we were to get attacked, or even if you're sitting in this room, you're probably affected in some way by the Oregon DMV breach. So one of the things they highly recommend doing is, of course, monitor your credit report. Look for anything that's suspicious or that you didn't do. An additional thing that you can do is actually freeze all your credit files. That basically prevents anyone from opening another account in your name until you unfreeze it. That can be a little involved, but it's a good measure to take. Now, if you do notice that something fraudulent has happened, they do recommend that you first file a report with the local police department. Sorry, Bob. Essentially what the local police report is going to get you is some clout when you start going to creditors or banks saying, hey, I was a victim. They're going to ask for that report right away. Another thing you can do is also report it to the Oregon Attorney General, and as well as the FTC. They handle a lot of these cybercrime fraud. Short and quick this time.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
You talked a lot about the staff. There's
Yes.
people here up on this dais who have email accounts, and we don't get security awareness training. I also haven't seen a phishing test in a while. Probably need to do that too.
Just haven't clicked on it yet.
Yeah, and then as far as the ransomware is concerned, you know, there's also the fake ransomwares, you know, the
Yes.
Nigerian princes and stuff like that you got to look out for. So there's all kinds of things. I mean, in freezing your credit rate, there's actually a 4th company, and I'll send you the information
Great.
later, because we just found out about that through the DMV situation, so.
There's a question.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
All
for
right.
taking the time.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Rob couldn't be here tonight, so I'm pinch hitting. This is a request and resolution to make some adjustments to this year's budget, so this fiscal year. As you all know, our budget is a best determination based upon prior years and forecasting for the year. With all of those multiple factors, it's common to see a need to adjust, particularly at the end of the year. Our fiscal year ends June 30th. We are at the end of the year. And we are actually looking at relatively nominal adjustments. The largest change you'll see is we had to move money into contract services, and that is because our finance director left for a larger city. We brought in a contract financial consultant, and we have to move money around into that line item. Other than that, it's very, very nominal, $1 in SDC, Parks SDCs, and then we'll be talking about urban renewal when we go into the urban renewal, but it's a nominal just to cover the interfund debt service. That was just a forecasting adjustment. That's really all that there is to talk about on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Questions? Something we get to do every year.
I guess I have one question. What does that put the contingency fund at, like percentage-wise?
We're still above our 60%.
This is an action item.
I move that council approve resolution number 23-1587 to amend the fiscal year 2022-23 adopted budget.
Second.
I have a motion from, was it Councilor Fitch?
I moved, she seconded.
Second.
And Councilor Schwartz was the second. Is there discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. There you have. Okay, Mr. Evander, I guess you're the next guy. You got a couple of them now.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, there's two resolutions before you. Both of them relate to some of this housing these housing grants that we were just discussing. The first one is for the housing production strategy. It's a grant for us to complete that work. It is absolutely a continuation of the housing needs analysis. It's the next phase. We are required to do that as a result of that House Bill 2003 that was passed in 2019. When we did go over that 10,000 person threshold, we then did get wrapped into their update cycle. The state was kind enough to give us money for the housing needs analysis. And we think that this in particular will be a fairly easy ask to do the housing production strategy. It really will, if sort of the housing needs analysis really sort of identifies the big picture of housing in the community, the housing production strategy will help us get into more of those nitty-gritty issues related to how we can actually achieve some of these things in the community. Are there any questions about that?
Just one. The housing needs analysis that we saw the presentation on this evening,
Yeah.
that's not full and final and unchangeable, is it?
It's not.
Okay.
There's no questions. This is an action item.
I move to approve resolution number 23-1585, authorizing application for a housing planning assistance grant from DLCD for an updated housing production strategy and authorizing the city manager or designee to sign the grant award contract.
Motion. Second by Joe. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. You get the next one, sir.
Perfect. So the second one is related to also asking for those same funds. This one would help us get to some of the issues that we know that we have related to infill housing. Sometimes infill is difficult to be compatible with neighboring homes. I mean, and we know that, we've seen that before. This would help us really look at the standards to make sure they're tailored for existing neighborhoods instead of greenfields, as Jamin was talking about, to look at things like parking, like Councilor Morton was talking about, just making sure that our infill standards are right-sized for our community. So when infill occurs, it's appropriate for the neighborhoods that it occurs in. That's really what we're hoping to do with this project. No doubt we will look at the standards related to things like how does this process work, you know? So we'll look at things like process, but we'll also look at the standards themselves. Do they promote a similar mass of buildings? Do they promote enough parking? Those sorts of things.
Fred, is there going to be any community engagement around the infill issue?
You bet, absolutely. That will absolutely be part of that project.
Questions?
Someone would make the motion, please.
Sure. I move to approve resolution number 23-1586, authorizing application to DLCD for a housing planning assistance grant and to authorize the city manager or designee to sign the grant award contract.
Second.
Motion second by Coor, discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna, if there are any general announcements, and then after that, we're gonna adjourn this meeting, we'll do the urban renewal because we have to do the end of the year budget movement there. Are there any other general council announcements that we need to make?
I've just got one, Mayor.
Please.
Save the date on your calendars for October 9th through the 11th. AARP Oregon will be here conducting an age-friendly event, a summit of sorts. It'll be at Western. I'll try to get some more information out, but I'm sure Emmanuel will get it in the next newsletter.
Great additional announcements. Without objection, I'm going to adjourn the city council meeting. And now I'm opening the urban renewal agency meeting. Let the record show that Councilor Roden and Councilor Martin Willis are not with us. Everybody else is here. Council members, you have the minutes of the June 13th meeting of the urban renewal district. Do they meet with your approval?
Move to approve.
I have a motion second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear who seconded.
It was,
Thank you.
don't see anybody jumping up for public comment. I don't have any report to make. City manager, do you have a report?
I do not have any report to make.
Okay, we're good, moving to the budget adjustment for Ms. West.
Thank you. This is simply a budget adjustment similar to what we just did for the city's general fund. As I noted at that time, this was just a forecasting error. It's very nominal. I have a little over $2,000 to adjust the URA and bring it within alignment.
Questions? This is an action item. It's on page 5.
I move that council approve resolution number 2023-02 to amend the fiscal year 2022-23 adopted budget.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Morton. All in discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, motion carries. Without objection, we're adjourned. Happy 4th of July, everybody. Thank you.